Okay guys, this is a very interesting video because there's a new study out there by the INGV and the University of Geneva that says that is catching many headlines right now. And it's kind of irritating, I have to say. So the headlines are all saying the same thing. You have maybe read it by now. Campi Flegrei cannot erupt. A dangerous eruption is decades away. Scientists say there's no real risk. Whew, you might look at that and think, oh, wow, that's really great. So this one study, so all the other 50 to 100 studies that have been coming out over the last years, they're all wrong? So are the scientists wrong that are warning that we could have a phreatic explosion at any day? Is this, okay, crisis at Campi Flegrei over and out? Well, guys, I have to tell you, we will look at that. Yes, the new scientific study by the INGV and the University of Geneva does say something important. They say, quote, under today's conditions, Campi Flegrei is not ready to erupt. Okay, today's conditions. But here is what almost nobody explains. That conclusion depends on very specific assumptions about how this supervolcano works. And that's where things get very interesting. And guys, before they get interesting, do me a favor, leave this video a like and a hype and share it with your friends. Leave me a comment. It helps my channel out and it doesn't cost you a thing. Thank you so much for doing this. So, why does it get interesting, guys? Because when we look closely at what is happening beneath the Campi Flegrei volcano in Italy, in Naples, with more than 6 million people, many scientists describe a very different process than the one that they have used in this study, and that is crucial. This study assumes that unrest happens slowly, that magma accumulates gradually, that everything follows a long, predictable timeline measured in decades. But other researchers say that the system today is not driven mainly by magma. They say it's driven by pressurized fluids and gas. And fluids behave very differently than magma. They don't move slowly. They don't need decades. They can weaken the rock. They can open fractures, which they do, by the way. Other studies confirm this. And they can change the system much faster than magma-based models expect. So here's the key point, and that is crucial. The study's not wrong, but it does not describe the full reality, in my opinion, of what this caldera is doing right now. It answers only one question. How long would it take to repeat something like the 1538 eruption if magma is the main driver? But I get to that in a second. The 1538 eruption didn't start with the magma. And what I want to stress, that this new study doesn't answer one crucial question. What happens if pressure, fluids, and a weakening crust are reaching the tipping point? And many studies tell us they are reaching that right now. And that difference really, really matters because volcanoes don't always follow slow timelines. Sometimes they cross thresholds and they do not always behave in the same way, especially, and Eddie agrees here with me, especially with volcanoes that don't erupt often. So we can't see a pattern. So here comes the crucial part of what I'm about to tell you today, guys. So stay with me because now I will show you what the study really says, but what other scientists say differently, and why the phrase decades away can be, on the one hand, scientifically correct and is still misleading at the same time. So this is where real science begins here, guys. So this I call it now the decades away study, does not show the full picture. And in my opinion, this is dangerous because people can feel lured in a false safety. For weeks now, for years, if you follow my channel, headlines have repeated in the same message. Since that study was released a day ago, 2 days ago, 3 days ago, in that time frame, we see people claim Campi Flegrei cannot erupt. A 1538 type eruption would take decades, nothing to worry about. It's scientifically proven right now. Sounds reassuring, but here's the uncomfortable truth. The conclusion depends entirely on assumptions. And assumptions can kill. That's a phrase that I always use. And I mean, this conclusion depends entirely on assumptions and not on what Campi Flegrei is actually doing right now. We just need to look at it. I've explained to you the recent bulletins. The curves are like rapidly escalating with everything. So this is one widely cited study by the Institute, INGV, and University of Geneva, but it does not represent the full physical reality, in my opinion, of that supervolcanic system beneath Naples. What I want to do is, let's not speculate, let's not fearmonger, but let's only look at what scientists themselves have published. Let's be precise. The new study does not predict an eruption. It runs scenario-based simulations. And the authors explicitly say that their model is a first-order scenario designed to explore possible system evolution. They're not saying, this is the Holy Grail. And that matters, right? So the model assumes each inflation phase is linked to magma input. That's the first thing. They're looking at magma only. Then they say magma accumulates slowly, and then they say the system evolves smoothly over decades. Well, it's been evolving for 2 decades already. We're getting into year 21. The current crisis started in 2005. But let's get back to the study. Under their assumptions, yes, a Monte Nuovo style eruption like 1538 would likely take decades if it evolves in the same exact way. And yes, that conclusion is internally consistent. But now comes the key question. Are those assumptions consistent with what other scientists observe today? Here we come to the core problem, magma versus fluids, right? Because many independent studies, they say something completely different. Some do and some do not see magma as the main driver right now. It's certainly involved, but it's not the main driver. They see the pressurized fluids in the hydrothermal system. So, for example, volcanologist Giuseppe Chiodini, who has studied Campi Flegrei for decades, he's an expert on this, has repeatedly explained that, I quote him here, the current unrest is dominated by fluids and gas pressure rather than magma ascent. This is not controversial. We have multiple peer-reviewed papers that show we have rising CO2 levels, we have hydrothermal pressurization, and we have a weakening of the crust. So in simple terms, Campi Flegrei today behaves more like a pressure cooker than a rising magma column. And that matters enormously because fluid-driven systems do not follow magma timelines. They do not. But the crucial part is, and that's what's so dangerous, we have all these studies that show the caprock layer is breaking. It starts to fail. We have cracks developing. The earthquakes are lining up around one rupture. We have a crack that is vertical towards the magma chambers. We have looked at studies that told us, oh, there's not much additional pressure needed to bring this thing to breaking point. And the fluids, we could start with a phreatic eruption that comes out of nothing, but it opens the vent for the magma. So maybe the magma doesn't need all the force itself. And something similar happened at Monte Nuovo. We did have a phreatic eruption first. So that's why it's a little bit of a one-sided view, in my opinion, because we do have confirmation that there is magma at shallow depth accumulating. And to say it won't erupt for decades, that's a very conditional claim. And many volcanoes all over the world have proven otherwise, right? We remember White Island, for example. And in my opinion, listen to this, in my opinion, this is the big crucial scientific flaw. I'll explain it simply. So the study's decades conclusion assumes magma volume must grow gradually. But what if a phreatic eruption opens the pathway? Like a miner, you know there's gold and you're digging a tunnel, you're digging with your shovel, but then you use explosives. It opens the tunnel very, very quickly. You get to the gold quicker. Or let's say this is magma, then it can flow out. This is always what you have to keep in mind. So they say, okay, magma volume must grow gradually, pressure builds up slowly, eruption only happens after long preparation. Fluid-driven systems do not work that way. Professor Giuseppe Di Natale, I report about him often, former INGV research director, has publicly warned multiple times. He says, quote, when fluids dominate, instability can develop much faster than magma-based models predict. Let that sink in. So this is basic physics. It's not tinfoil hat. Fluids reduce rock strength. We've got all the studies to prove that. I've reported about all of them. Fluids open fractures. Fluids transfer stress rapidly. That means the system can change its state suddenly. Switch flipped, not gradually. So the statement, decades away, is not wrong, but it's only true if no trigger occurs. So that's why they mentioned the word today, right? And then there's another problem. I have a big problem with the comparison they make with the 1538 eruption of Monte Nuovo. I've reported about that eruption quite often. And we have studies that have looked at that and that they found out, whoa, this thing is completely different than we previously thought. So this current study uses the 1538 Monte Nuovo eruption as its benchmark, but scientists agree on one thing. Future eruptions do not need to look like past ones, and they do not, and especially not like with these large caldera volcanoes. Campi Flegrei has produced various different types of eruptions, small phreatomagmatic eruptions, which are bad enough. Let's make that clear, because people live right on top of the volcano, really right on top, because they didn't see that this is such a threatening volcano. Vesuvius, for example, big stratovolcano, as if they were living right in its crater, right? Well, it's bad enough. They live along its slope, which is also dangerous enough. But Campi Flegrei, again, let's bring the slope back. Yeah, small phreatomagnetic eruptions, vents opening outside uplift centers, rapid onset events with limited precursors. Right now, we have many scientists warning it could happen without a warning. So by framing the risk as how long until another 1538, well, you're really narrowing the question, right? You really then basically say, we're only talking about this and not all the other possibilities. The real question is, what kinds of eruptions are physically possible under today's conditions? That's the important question, the elephant in the room, in my opinion. And that question is way broader than just 1538, and it's way more uncomfortable. I only want to address quickly what other studies show because there are in my playlist, Campi Flegrei playlist. I'll put it in the end screen. There you can see by yourself all the graphics, all the explanations. So recent high resolution imaging show gas-rich reservoir beneath the caldera, mechanically weakened cap rock, repeated fracture reactivation. And one nature level study concluded that, quote, gas pressurization and cap rock deformation significantly enhance the hazard. So that does not contradict the recent study, but it changes the clock. It changes the clock. Instead of the phrase slow magma accumulation, the controlling factor becomes how close is the crust to failure? How close is the crust to failure? And that's so critical because it is close. It is close. I've shown you all the studies. So when the controlling factor is how close is the crust to failure, guys, this is not a decades-long process. It's a threshold process. And this matters for the public. It does. Here's the key point, in my opinion. We want to make that clear and we want to word that responsibly. This study is scientifically valid within its assumptions. But those assumptions exclude fast escalation scenarios. Other scientists explicitly warn that such scenarios exist. They prove it. We have the studies, way more studies than just this one that looks at its own bubble. So when the headlines say there is no eruption risk for decades, it's dangerous, in my opinion. Very, very dangerous. Because this is not what science as a whole actually says. This is only one study. And even in that study, they kind of make it clear that they're not saying there is no danger. But it's just how some reporters or some news outlets or YouTubers interpret it, but they interpret it wrong, in my opinion. Science actually says, here it is, plain and simple. No eruption is indicated right now, but the system remains capable of rapid change. And it's always like this with earthquakes. Well, there's no earthquake happening or earthquake warning right now until it's happening, right? So I repeat it again. Quote, what science says, no eruption is indicated right now, but the system remains capable of rapid change. Those are very different messages. Yes, Campi Flegrei is not erupting right now. There's no imminent eruption signal as of today. But science does not support the idea that the future is safely locked decades away. The reality is way more complex. And I'm saying this really right now, how can I say? Carefully worded, because this is one study versus so many that say completely otherwise, even when it comes to the 1538 eruption. The reality is way more complex. It's way more uncertain, and it's way more deserving of honesty, in my opinion. Honesty, because the greater Naples area is more than 6 million people. Now the argument might say, well, but the red zone, even if it's a phreatic eruption, it's Pozzuoli, 80,000 people, the greater red zone, 500,000 people. Yeah, but what do you think happens when a supervolcano starts erupting? Do you think the people in Naples that are not in Western Naples, they're saying, yeah, the line is here, that's the red zone. We're in the yellow zone, no problem. Of course they will take their car and try to leave, because you never know, right? And that will create chaos. It will clog everything. Total disaster, in my opinion. My sentence, more deserving of honesty. This is, I'm not saying they're lying. No, not at all. But let's be honest about your conclusions. Let's be honest about what you really think, right? If you're involved into research and into looking at this thing. I think this is what responsible science demands. And because with that many people living there, this is, in my opinion, a better safe than sorry situation. Roberto Scandone has warned in 23, if I was me, or in 24, I would evacuate right now. This was before the current crisis with these magnitude 4 plus earthquakes even started. Mastro Lorenzo has said it can happen at any time. We have to prepare for a scenario of phreatic and volcanic eruptions. He's a CN scientist by the INGV. We have scientists of the INGV speaking in their own. They say, well, I'm speaking outside of the institution, right? And then we have the institution. So what's your takeaway, guys? Let me know in the comments. Let's discuss this. I will keep you updated about everything. We just had earthquakes at Campi Flegrei, 2.5, 2 point something, another earthquake swarm happening there right now. So thanks for watching. Thanks for liking. Thanks for hyping, for sharing, for commenting. Check out the playlist. If you want to learn about these studies, look at the Campi Flegrei playlist. I've read them all and I've reported about all of them. If you're interested in something else, guys, I've chosen a few videos here in the end screen, but always go to my channel start page and click on videos, click on recent, because even if you're subscribed and click the notification bell, sometimes YouTube doesn't send you a message when a new video is out. And I would like to see you every day because I'm releasing videos every day. So stay safe, guys. Be prepared, use your own head, do your own thinking, and draw your own conclusions to be safe. Bye-bye.